hush fell over the delivery room, the kind that seemed to stretch time itself. The steady rhythm of monitors beeped faintly in the background, overshadowed by the palpable anticipation that filled the air. The new parents, Sarah and Michael, held their breath as they waited for the cries of their newborn twins to pierce through the moment. They had dreamed of this day, imagining what their little ones would look like, how they'd sound, and the joy they would bring to their lives. It was a moment years in the making, filled with love, hope, and an endless cascade of prayers. The doctor, Dr. Elaine Carter, a seasoned professional with decades of experience, gently guided the first baby into the world. A sharp cry echoed through the room, a sound of life and vitality. "It's a girl," Dr. Carter announced, her voice warm and reassuring. Sarah let out a relieved laugh, her eyes welling up with tears, and Michael squeezed her hand tightly, his face glowing with pride. Just moments later, the second twin followed. This time, the room grew quieter. The baby's arrival was swift, almost too swift, and the doctor's expression shifted ever so slightly as she cradled the newborn in her gloved hands. A momentary flicker of something, was it curiosity, concern, or disbelief, flashed across Dr. Carter's face. She quickly composed herself and handed the second baby to the nurse, who began routine checks. "It's a boy," Dr. Carter announced, her voice steady but with an undertone that only the most observant might notice. Sarah and Michael were too overwhelmed with emotion to catch it. They were already lost in the joy of hearing their son's first cries, their hearts brimming with gratitude. But behind the scenes, something extraordinary was happening. As the medical team carried out their initial assessments, a subtle but undeniable anomaly began to emerge. Dr. Carter's sharp eyes picked up on it immediately. She leaned over to inspect the boy again, her mind racing with possibilities. She had delivered thousands of babies in her career, seen rare conditions and miraculous recoveries, but this was something entirely different. The nurse, noticing Dr. Carter's prolonged attention, whispered quietly, "Is everything okay, doctor?" Dr. Carter nodded slowly but didn't look up. "Yes, but I need to run a few quick checks." "Just routine," she said, her voice calm, but her demeanor hyper-focused. She didn't want to alarm the parents. Not yet. There was still so much they didn't know. Meanwhile, Sarah and Michael were blissfully unaware of the undercurrent of tension. Sarah, exhausted but elated, gazed lovingly at her daughter, her tiny fingers curling around her own. Michael held their son, marveling at how something so small could feel so monumental. They exchanged smiles, their world perfect in that fleeting moment. But as Dr. Carter quietly excused herself to confer with a colleague, a subtle unease began to creep into the atmosphere. The medical team moved with a precision that was almost too deliberate, their whispered exchanges hinting at something more. The nurses performed additional checks, their faces composed but their movements betraying a heightened sense of urgency. Sarah, sensing a change, glanced at Michael. "Is everything okay with the babies?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. Michael, still holding their son, gave her a reassuring smile. "They're fine. Perfect, actually. Don't overthink it," he said, though his own eyes flicked toward the bustling medical team. Dr. Carter returned to the room, her expression professional yet unreadable. She approached the parents with the kind of measured calm that only someone accustomed to delivering life-altering news could muster. "Sarah, Michael," she began, her voice steady, "your babies are healthy and beautiful. There's just one thing I need to discuss with you. It's nothing to worry about, but it is something I've never seen before." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Michael sat up straighter, his protective instincts kicking in. "What do you mean?" he asked, his tone edged with concern. Dr. Carter hesitated for the briefest of moments, carefully choosing her words. "Your son, there's something remarkable about him. It's not a cause for concern, but it's something so rare, so unique, that it's—" She trailed off, as if the weight of her discovery was almost too incredible to put into words. Before she could continue, a nurse entered the room with a clipboard, her face pale. "Doctor," she said quietly, "you might want to see this." Dr. Carter glanced at the parents, offering a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'll be right back," she said softly, leaving Sarah and Michael with 1,000 questions swirling in their minds. As the door closed behind her, Sarah turned to Michael, her voice trembling. "What's going on? What could be so rare that they wouldn't tell us right away?" Michael didn't have an answer. All he could do was hold her hand tighter, his own heart pounding as he tried to prepare himself for whatever was to come. In the hallway, Dr. Carter studied the nurse's findings, her mind racing. What she had just discovered wasn't just rare, It was a phenomenon so extraordinary that it defied everything she thought she knew about human biology. And yet, this was only the beginning. The real mystery was still unraveling, and it was a secret that would change not just the lives of Sarah and Michael, but potentially the understanding of life itself. What lay ahead was a journey into the unknown, one that would challenge science, faith, and the very fabric of human connection. As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the room grew unbearable. Sarah and Michael exchanged worried glances, their joy now mingled with fear. What could the doctor possibly have discovered in those first few seconds of their son's life? And why did it feel like their world was about to change forever? Dr. Carter stood in the quiet hallway, her eyes fixed on the clipboard in her hands. The nurse beside her shifted nervously, as if unsure how to interpret the findings they had just uncovered. The numbers, the readings, everything about the situation defied logic. It wasn't a mistake. They had double-checked, triple-checked, even. The results were consistent. But how could something so extraordinary, so unexplainable be real? Inside the delivery room, Sarah and Michael sat in tense silence. The once joyful atmosphere was now tinged with unease. Sarah held her daughter close, whispering softly to her, as though trying to shield her from the weight of the unknown. Michael gently rocked their son, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the look on Dr. Carter's face before she left. Professional, yes, but also tinged with disbelief. What could she have seen that would leave someone so experienced at a loss for words? Minutes felt like hours. Sarah finally broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "Michael, do you think something's wrong with him? With our son?" Michael shook his head quickly, though his own doubts gnawed at him. No, he said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "If it was serious, they would have told us by now. He's healthy," she said that herself. "Maybe it's, I don't know, something unusual, but not bad." Sarah nodded, trying to convince herself of the same. But a mother's intuition is rarely wrong, and something about the way the nurses had hovered, the way Dr. Carter had hesitated, it didn't feel like nothing. It felt like the beginning of something they couldn't yet understand. In the hallway, Dr. Carter took a deep breath and handed the clipboard back to the nurse. "Run the tests again," she said firmly. "I need absolute confirmation before I tell the parents anything." The nurse hesitated. "Doctor, we've already—" Again, Dr. Carter interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Notify the neonatal specialist. I want that input on this." As the nurse hurried off, Dr. Carter leaned against the wall, rubbing her temples. She had delivered countless babies, witnessed rare genetic conditions, even handled cases that had made headlines. But this was something else entirely. She thought back to the exact moment the boy had been born, to the subtle but unmistakable signs that had caught her attention. His vitals were perfect, his breathing strong, his appearance ordinary in every way. And yet there was something about him, something beneath the surface, that set him apart. Dr. Carter couldn't help but think back to her medical training, to the stories she'd heard from colleagues about anomalies that had rewritten the textbooks. Was this one of those cases? Was this child destined to challenge everything they thought they knew about the human body, about life itself? Back in the room, the door opened slightly and a nurse peeked in. "The doctor will be back shortly," she said with a reassuring smile. "Everything is fine, just a few routine checks." Routine. The word hung in the air like a lifeline. Sarah tried to cling to it, to the idea that this was all just a precaution, nothing more. But the longer they waited, the harder it became to believe. Michael finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "Do you think maybe it's something genetic? Like something neither of us knows we carry?" Sarah glanced at him, her brow furrowed. "I don't know, but if it were, wouldn't they have seen something earlier? In all the ultrasounds, the tests, they said everything was normal." Michael nodded, though the uncertainty lingered. "Yeah, you're right. It's probably nothing major. Maybe he just has, I don't know, a rare blood type or something. Something unique, but not dangerous." Sarah sighed, her gaze falling on their son's tiny face. "I just want him to be okay," she murmured. "Both of them. I just want them to grow up happy and healthy." "They will," Michael said firmly, though the weight of his own doubts pressed heavily on him. "Whatever it is, we'll deal with it together." The door opened again, and this time Dr. Carter stepped in. Her expression was calm, but there was an undercurrent of urgency in her movements. She approached the parents, her hands clasped in front of her, as if bracing herself for the conversation ahead. "Sarah, Michael," she began, her voice gentle but measured. "First, let me say again that both of your babies are healthy. They're strong, they're breathing well, and they're showing no signs of any immediate medical issues." Sarah's grip on her daughter tightened, her heart pounding. "But," she asked, her voice barely audible. Dr. Carter hesitated, then continued. "Your son, he has something we've never seen before. It's not harmful, at least not from what we can tell right now, but it's unique." Michael frowned. "Unique how?" Dr. Carter glanced at the nurse who had entered behind her, then back at the parents. "His blood. We ran standard tests, as we do with all newborns, and his results came back unusual. We've run them multiple times to ensure accuracy, and each time the results are consistent." Sarah's voice trembled. "What does that mean? Is it a condition? A disorder?" Dr. Carter shook her head. "No, it's not a disorder. It's difficult to explain. His blood has certain properties that don't align with what we know about human biology. It's almost as though," she paused, searching for the right words, "it's almost as though it's evolved in some way." Michael blinked, struggling to process what he was hearing. Evolved? Like, what, he's some kind of superhuman? Dr. Carter smiled faintly, though her expression remained serious. "Not superhuman, just different. We need to do more tests to fully understand what this means, but I want to assure you both that your son is healthy. Whatever this is, it doesn't appear to be causing him any harm." Sarah felt a lump rise in her throat. But what if it does? What if this, whatever it is, makes him sick later on? "We'll monitor him closely," Dr. Carter said. "We'll make sure he gets the best care possible. But right now, there's no indication that this is anything to worry about. It's just something we've never seen before." The room fell silent as Sarah and Michael tried to absorb the news. Their son, their perfect, tiny son, was a mystery, a one-in-a-million anomaly that even the doctors couldn't fully explain. What did this mean for his future, for their family, and why did it feel like this was only the beginning of a much larger story? The days following the twins' birth were a whirlwind of emotions for Sarah and Michael. They were thrilled to finally bring their babies home, but a cloud of uncertainty hung over them. Dr. Carter had scheduled follow-up appointments to monitor their son's condition, but the word condition didn't sit well with Sarah. It wasn't as though he was sick. He was growing, eating, and sleeping just like any other newborn. Yet the knowledge that something so unique lay beneath his tiny frame made every moment feel fragile, as though they were holding on to a secret too big to understand. Michael tried his best to stay optimistic. He dove into research late at night while Sarah fed the twins, searching for anything remotely similar to what Dr. Carter had described. He read articles about rare genetic mutations, breakthroughs in biology, even fringe theories about human evolution, but nothing matched what their son was experiencing. It was as if the answers were just out of reach, hidden behind a veil of scientific mystery. One evening, after the twins had finally drifted to sleep, Sarah sat on the couch, staring at the monitor that displayed their little ones in their cribs. "Do you think we should tell anyone?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. Michael looked up from his laptop, his brow furrowed. "Tell them what? That our son has special blood. What could we even say?" Sarah shrugged, her voice trembling. "I don't know. Maybe just our families. I feel like we're keeping this huge thing to ourselves, and it's eating me up inside." Michael closed his laptop and moved closer to her, taking her hand in his. "I get it. I do. But I don't think anyone would understand. And what if it gets out? What if people start treating him differently because of it?" Sarah nodded slowly, her eyes welling up. "I don't want that for him. I wish we knew what this meant. What if we're missing something? What if we're supposed to do something, and we don't even know it?" Michael pulled her into a hug, his own fears bubbling beneath the surface. "We're doing everything we can. Dr. Carter's the best, and she's looking into it. We just have to be patient." But patience was easier said than practiced. As the weeks passed, the medical tests became more invasive. Dr. Carter explained every step, assuring them it was all necessary to uncover the truth about their son's condition. Sarah hated seeing the tiny needle marks on his arms, the way he flinched during blood draws. It made her feel helpless, like she was failing him somehow. Then there was the question of their daughter. She was perfectly healthy, developing right on track, but Sarah couldn't help but wonder if she might somehow be affected too. Was it possible that whatever made their son unique could manifest in her later? Dr. Carter had assured them that the twins were different in this regard, but the uncertainty still lingered. One evening, after another round of tests, Dr. Carter called with unexpected news. "We compared your son's blood to every database we have access to," she said, her tone professional but laced with excitement. "And it doesn't match anything. Not a single known condition, mutation, or anomaly. It's completely unique. Michael, who had answered the call, glanced at Sarah, his expression unreadable. What does that mean? Is that good? It's neither good nor bad, Dr. Carter replied. It's just unprecedented. But I did notice something unusual during our last round of tests. His cells seem to regenerate faster than average. Much faster. It's as though his body is repairing itself at a rate we've never seen before. Sarah, who had been listening on speaker, felt a chill run down her spine. What does that mean for him? For his future? Dr. Carter hesitated. That's the question we're trying to answer. At this stage, we don't see any negative effects. In fact, it could be beneficial, but it's also entirely new territory. We'll need to keep monitoring him closely. After the call ended, Sarah and Michael sat in silence, the weight of the revelation sinking in. Faster cell regeneration. It sounded almost impossible, like something out of a science fiction story, but this wasn't fiction. It was their reality. As the twins grew, subtle differences between them began to emerge. While their daughter hit every developmental milestone right on time, their son seemed to progress faster. He rolled over, crawled, and even stood earlier than expected. At first, Sarah and Michael chalked it up to normal variation. But as time went on, the differences became harder to ignore. There were also the little things that didn't seem significant at first but added up over time. Scratches or bruises on their son's skin would disappear overnight. When he caught a mild cold, he recovered within hours, while his sister took days. Sarah started keeping a journal, recording every detail, hoping to make sense of it all. One afternoon, while the twins napped, Sarah decided to share her notes with Dr. Carter. She sent over pages of observations, from the rapid healing to the milestones. Dr. Carter called later that evening, her voice filled with a mix of curiosity and caution. Sarah, I've reviewed your notes, she said, and while some of these observations could be coincidental, others, they align with what we've seen in the lab. I think it's time we consult with a specialist, a geneticist who might be able to provide more insight. Sarah agreed, though the thought of more tests made her stomach churn. As much as she wanted answers, she dreaded putting her son through more poking and prodding. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than their family, bigger than anything they could comprehend. As the days turned into weeks, the appointments with the geneticist brought more questions than answers. The specialist was baffled by the findings, repeatedly describing their son's condition as a marvel of biology. He proposed further testing, including a deeper dive into the twins' DNA to see if any shared genetic markers could explain the anomaly. Michael, who had been quiet during most of these discussions, finally voiced what they were both thinking. What if this isn't just genetic? What if it's something else? The room fell silent, the weight of his words lingering. No one wanted to say it out loud, but the thought was there. What if their son's uniqueness wasn't entirely natural? What if it was something beyond their understanding, something they weren't meant to know? And with that unspoken question, the mystery deepened, leaving Sarah and Michael grappling with the unknown as they tried to protect their family from a truth they might not be ready to face. The weeks turned into months, and the mystery surrounding their son only deepened. Sarah and Michael were doing their best to maintain a sense of normalcy, but the tension in their home was palpable. Every appointment, every conversation with Dr. Carter or the geneticist seemed to lead to more questions and no answers. It was as if they were standing on the edge of a revelation too big to comprehend, unable to step back but too afraid to look down. Their son, whom they had named Ethan, was thriving in every way. He was a happy, curious baby, always exploring his surroundings with a determination that seemed beyond his age. His twin sister, Emma, was equally vibrant, but Ethan's rapid development was impossible to ignore. By the time they were a year old, Ethan was already walking confidently, while Emma was just beginning to take her first wobbly steps. Sarah and Michael tried to downplay the differences, but it was clear to anyone who spent time with them that Ethan was extraordinary. One evening, after the twins were asleep, Michael sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through articles on his laptop. He had become obsessed with finding any information that could explain what was happening. Sarah sat across from him, nursing a cup of tea, her expression weary. "You're not going to find anything," she said softly, her voice tinged with resignation. "We've looked everywhere, we talked to everyone. Whatever this is, it's not something anyone's seen before." Michael leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "I know, but I can't just sit here and do nothing. There has to be an explanation, something we're missing." Sarah reached out and placed a hand on his. "What if there isn't? What if Ethan is just different? Does it matter why?" Michael looked at her, his jaw tight. It matters if it puts him in danger. It matters if someone else finds out and tries to take him away from us." The words hung in the air, heavy and unspoken until now. It was a fear that had been building for months, one they hadn't dared to voice. The idea that Ethan's uniqueness could make him a target was terrifying. They had been careful not to share too much, even with close friends and family, but the thought of someone discovering the truth was always in the back of their minds. As if on cue, Sarah's phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen and saw Dr. Carter's name. Her heart skipped a beat as she picked up the phone, her voice trembling. "Hello." "Sarah," Dr. Carter said, her tone urgent. "I need you and Michael to come to the hospital as soon as possible. There's something you need to see." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Is it Ethan? Did something happen?" No, Ethan is fine," Dr. Carter reassured her. "But we've received the results from the latest tests, and, well, it's significant. I think you'll want to hear this in person." After hanging up, Sarah relayed the message to Michael, who immediately grabbed his keys. They called a neighbor to watch the twins and rushed to the hospital, their minds racing with possibilities. When they arrived, Dr. Carter met them in her office, her expression serious but composed. She gestured for them to sit and handed Michael a folder filled with charts and data. "These are the results of the DNA sequencing we ran on Ethan," she began. "We compared his genome to known human DNA samples, as well as any documented anomalies. What we found is unprecedented." Michael flipped through the papers, his hands trembling. "What does this mean? Is he not human?" Dr. Carter shook her head. "No, he's human. But there are sequences in his DNA that don't match anything in our database. It's as though his genetic code has been altered in ways we can't explain. These changes aren't random. They are deliberate." Sarah stared at her, her voice barely a whisper. "Deliberate? Are you saying someone did this to him?" Dr. Carter hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I can't say for sure, but it's clear that these alterations give him certain advantages. Enhanced healing, accelerated development. It's almost as if his DNA has been optimized." Michael's mind raced. Optimized for what? And why? Who would even have the ability to do something like this? Dr. Carter leaned forward, her voice low. "That's the question, isn't it? This isn't something that happens naturally. If someone is behind this, they're operating on a level of science that's far beyond anything we currently understand." Sarah felt a wave of nausea wash over her. "What do we do now? How do we protect him?" Dr. Carter hesitated. "For now, I suggest keeping this between us. The fewer people who know, the better. I'll continue researching, but you need to be vigilant. If someone is responsible for this, they might come looking for him." The drive home was silent, the weight of Dr. Carter's words pressing down on them like a physical force. Sarah stared out the window, her mind spinning with questions. Who would do something like this? And why would they choose Ethan? Or had it even been a choice? When they arrived home, they found the twins fast asleep, their tiny faces peaceful and unaware of the storm brewing around them. Sarah watched Ethan for a long time, her heart aching with a mix of love and fear. He was her baby, her perfect little boy. But he was also a mystery, one that could change everything. That night, as they lay in bed, Michael spoke in a hushed tone. "What if this isn't random? What if whoever did this comes back?" Sarah turned to him, her eyes wide with fear. "Then we'll fight. We'll do whatever it takes to keep him safe." But as she said the words, she couldn't shake the feeling that the battle had already begun, and they were fighting an enemy they couldn't even see. The night was eerily quiet, but Sarah couldn't sleep. Every sound seemed amplified. The soft hum of the baby monitor, the creak of the house settling, the faint rustle of leaves outside. She lay staring at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. Michael was beside her, his breathing deep and steady, but even in his sleep, his brow was furrowed, as though his mind couldn't escape the weight of their situation. Suddenly, a faint noise broke through the stillness, a low, rhythmic peeping. Sarah's heart jumped as she sat up, scanning the room. It wasn't coming from the monitor, but it was close. She nudged Michael awake, her voice a whisper. "Do you get that?" Michael groggily sat up, listening. The beeping was faint but persistent, a sound that didn't belong. He got out of bed and followed it to the twins' room, Sarah close behind. The moment they stepped inside, the sound stopped. Everything looked normal. Emma and Ethan were fast asleep, their chests rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. But the silence felt wrong, like the calm before a storm. Michael checked the monitor again, flipping it over in his hands. "It's not this," he said, his voice hushed but tense. Sarah glanced around the room, her eyes landing on the small collection of stuffed animals near Ethan's crib. One of them, a soft, unassuming bear, seemed out of place. She didn't remember buying it, and it wasn't a gift she recognized. Her hands shook as she picked it up, turning it over. Embedded in the seam along its back was a tiny, blinking light. Her breath caught. "Michael, this isn't ours." Michael's face darkened as he took the bear from her, inspecting it closely. "It's a tracker," he muttered, his voice laced with disbelief and anger. "Someone's been watching us." Panic surged through Sarah as she instinctively moved to check on Ethan, as though her touch alone could protect him. "How long has it been here? Who put it here?" Michael didn't answer, his mind already racing for solutions. He grabbed his phone and quickly called Dr. Carter, who answered after only a few rings. "We found something," he said, his voice low but urgent. "A tracker inside a toy in Ethan's room." Dr. Carter's voice sharpened immediately. "Get it out of the house. Don't destroy it yet, but remove it. And be careful. If someone's been monitoring you, they might already know you found it." Michael ended the call and grabbed a plastic bag from the kitchen, carefully placing the bear inside. He sat it on the counter, his eyes narrowing with determination. "Whoever did this, they're not getting anywhere near our kids." Sarah's legs felt weak as she sank into a chair, her hands trembling. "Michael, this isn't just about Ethan anymore. They know where we live. They've been in our house." Michael knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "We're not alone in this. Dr. Carter knows, and we'll figure out who's behind this. But we have to stay calm for the twins." The next day, Dr. Carter arranged for a security specialist to visit their home. He was a no-nonsense man named Harris, whose very presence seemed to command authority. After inspecting the bear, he confirmed their fears. "This is high-grade tech," he said, his tone grim. "Not something you find off the shelf. Whoever planted this has resources, and they're serious." Harris swept the house for additional devices, finding none, but his expression didn't soften. "They didn't leave this here for fun," he said. "They're after something. You need to be on high alert." Michael and Sarah agreed to install a new security system and began taking extra precautions, but the unease didn't fade. Every time the twins laughed or cried, every time Ethan showed another extraordinary ability, Sarah couldn't help but feel like they were being watched. The world outside their home felt dangerous, full of shadows and unseen threats. Then, one evening, as they were settling in for the night, Sarah's phone buzzed with a new email. It was from an address she didn't recognize, and the subject line sent a chill down her spine. "We know about Ethan." Her hands shook as she opened it. The message was brief but chilling. "You're not safe. We'll be in touch." Michael read the message over her shoulder, his jaw tightening. "This isn't random. They're escalating." "Who are they?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "What do they want from us?" Michael didn't have an answer, but he knew one thing for certain. Whoever was behind this wasn't going to stop. The bear, the email, it was all part of a larger plan, one that revolved around Ethan and whatever secrets his DNA held. That night, as they checked on the twins for what felt like the 100th time, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Ethan was special, more than they had ever imagined, and now the world seemed determined to take him away.